I know I met you just earlier today. I'm working in the languages of Lower Sindh. There are people working on languages in Punjab. There are people working on languages in Balochistan. So this is definitely an issue that spans across the country. And we're hoping that Zubair Sahab's contributions will perhaps reflect some of those issues. And during the discussion, we would love to invite you to contribute questions as well. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. Jackie Try, also my colleague from, I should have said Professor Jackie Try, but notice I'm not into those things, but horror to me. But Jackie is a professor in my department. She works she's currently the director of research on Aboriginal and Torres Islands. And she has made tremendous contributions, not just in terms of language maintenance, language documentation, but also in the design of the Australian curriculum, specifically in relation to the Australian curriculum for indigenous languages. So again, that are some of the things she'll be talking about, but she will also talk about perhaps the value of the need for maintaining language diversity, which unfortunately we are losing quite rapidly in this country, and unfortunately also we tend to have stereotypes that contribute and continue to contribute to it. So hopefully by raising awareness and discussing these issues, and you guys taking this conversation further, please don't stop at the conference, but communicating these ideas with your colleagues, with your friends, with your students, to try to break some of those stereotypes or challenge those stereotypes, I think is extremely important. Zubair Ahmad Sahab joined us, Tafseer Ahmad Sahab joined us in Karachi. His expertise is in computational linguistics, and in fact, a computational linguist, I'm so delighted that you guys are part of this conference. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this, because in most conferences on applied linguistics around the world, computational linguists are absent. They live in their own world. And the fact that the computational linguists are not just present here, but they're present in a number, and have taken a leadership role in organizing this conference, not just this one, but the previous ones, speaks volumes. It tells us about the social consciousness that our colleagues have in the context of computational linguistics, and the kind of work that they're doing on documenting and describing and creating scripts for local languages is an immense contribution. And I think Zubair Sahab here will also mention how he has been struggling with issues of characters and keyboards, and how he has been collaborating with people who do computational linguistics work to be able to resolve those issues. So thus, computational linguists have a huge contribution to make in the context of Pakistan, in the context of language maintenance and language diversity. I wanted to introduce the panel a bit, and then talk briefly about what we did in Swat, and some of the ideas that emerged out of our conversations in Swat. So we spent quite a bit of time, of course, talking about the Torwali community, but not just that. We talked quite a bit about other minority languages across northern areas, which is one of the most diverse areas in terms of linguistic diversity, in terms of this region and the number of languages that they have. And that's not untypical given the high mountains that isolate people, that languages evolve in a certain way. But it's also reflective of the amount of diversity that we have in the country. During our conversations, we also talked about how these were not just issues of language, but it's also the issues of self-respect, issues of empowerment, issues of health, access to health, issues of environment, issues of garbage on the streets and the picnic areas in Kalam. We talked about issues of linguistic landscapes, and how we can think of linguistic landscape, for example, a way of understanding how our multinational and big corporations are contributing to making our cities dirty, and our beautiful, pristine valleys of Swat dirty, because unfortunately when people bring this stuff to those areas, they don't take them back. So how does linguistic landscape contribute to these sort of issues, and how can we take them further? So we've been talking quite a bit about, not just about the theory, but how about language plays a role in thinking about issues of language and community in terms of national development, national stability, in terms of political issues, in terms of policy issues, in terms of educational issues, in terms of access to education for females. There's so many elements that need to be that we can talk about here in terms of the kind of discriminations that evolve in our society, given issues of policy and implementation, and how those once those stereotypes evolve, they take a life of their own, which support the hegemonic discourses, which keep, unfortunately, the people in the periphery of Pakistan in the periphery. And so one of the ways in which we can mobilize this is through understanding linguistic diversity, recognizing linguistic diversity, and encouraging linguistic diversity. And in that sense, one of the conversations that we had, we were having a conversation and thought we can actually create a new field of linguistics. And the term that we have for it is linguistic tourism. Linguistic tourism is something that we sort of developed an idea of, and we're going to work on it together. Dr. Zaki has already also identified some travel agents who might be interested in collaborating with us, which is fantastic. We want an industry collaboration. Imagine that we have a linguistic tourism where we can bring in tourists from all over Pakistan and all over the world to come into the communities, engage with the communities, listen to the way that they speak language, learn about how they see the world through the language, learn about the culture, learn about the music. We have such a beautiful musical tradition in this country. Use that as a resource for bringing harmony and bringing economic benefits to the communities, which might create more value for these languages. So instead of the people at the moment feeling disadvantaged because they speak a minority language, and shifting to other languages, they can feel pride in their language, and perhaps instead of going to Dubai and working as laborers for petty wages and horrible living circumstances, they might want to stay back in their homes and build their homes. So those are some of the ideas that we can consider and develop as we think of language diversity and linguistic tourism. So these are just some of the things. I mean, I know I've been talking for more than 5 minutes perhaps, and I'm going to pass this on. So the idea is that I'm going to pass the mic on air. Everybody will take about 5 to 7 minutes to talk about their perspectives on these issues. And during the time, I will be collecting questions. Do we have a team of volunteers somewhere? So there are volunteers here. If you have a question for anyone, can you please write it down and pass it to me? And so I will keep collecting these questions. And once all the speakers have had a chance, I will moderate the discussion through those questions. So there will be no oral questions. All questions have to be written down. So please, if you have questions, tell one of the volunteers and they'll take it and bring it down to me. All right? So that's how we'll proceed. The session is going to be about another 45-50 minutes, followed by activities. With that, Shirley.
Okay. Thank you, Ahmar. Before I start, I'd like to thank the organizers, especially Dr. Sajida. It was wonderful being here in this conference and being in Pakistan as a whole. Okay, I have a wonderful time. I had a wonderful time and looking forward to having another wonderful time next year. Okay. I only sat in a few paper presentations so far, yesterday and this morning, and I listened to quite a few of the presentations, and I'd like to zero in on the discussion on the use of mother tongue in the classrooms. In some of the papers that I listened to, this is what I gather. I could be wrong, but this is what I gather. That the majority still subscribe to the English-only policy, and that they discourage the use of the mother tongue in classroom discussions. I actually felt bad that this is the perception of the majority, that especially in English language classroom, in ELT classrooms, they totally discourage the use of mother tongue. Okay? As a matter of fact, I heard some side comments that they are penalized when they speak in their mother tongue. Okay? And they don't see the value of using the mother tongue in the transmission of knowledge, or in the discussion, in the in the teaching of content courses, content subjects like English, math, or science. So there's still this belief, okay, that English should be used as medium of instruction, okay, should be used in teaching the content courses like math, science, English technology, and so forth. Okay, I'd like to share the experience in the Philippines. That was also our perception for many years, for decades. Okay, I'm a product of the English-only policy. As a matter of fact, when I was in elementary, I was also penalized for speaking in my mother tongue. Since I'm one such talkative person, okay, I would spend, so much time expressing myself in my language. Imagine my allowance would just be given to the treasurer of the class because I am penalized for speaking in my language. So that's how my elementary and high school went. Okay, if you speak in your language, then you have to pay. So that's where I usually put my allowance in. Okay, until 2012, that was our belief. In the Philippines, that was our perception. That's what everyone else believed, that we cannot speak in our mother tongue. If we want to acquire English, if we want to be globally competitive when it comes to English, that's a big blunder. Okay, so we conducted separate case studies proving the value of mother tongue in the acquisition of second language. Okay, and there are a lot of studies that prove this. Okay, not just in the Philippines, Indonesia, everywhere. Okay, as a matter of fact, even those first world countries never make use of English in the first crucial stages of education. They make use of their mother tongue, and look at where they are. Okay, they don't need to acquire English first just to be globally competitive. Okay, so slowly, okay, we conducted isolated cases. Okay, I mean this ethnicity in this area in that island, and then eventually, after many years of hard work, okay, we were able to convince the government, okay, to mandate a mother tongue-based multilingual education. So starting 2012, we started with 12 Philippine languages, okay, as the medium of instruction in the first 3 levels of elementary. So all the content areas like English, math, and science are all taught using whichever is the mother tongue of that locality. So we started with 12 languages. Of course, it's not easy. Before that was even mandated by the government, we had to work hard for the orthography, language documentation, the preparation of teaching materials, of learning materials, the teacher training most especially, and the mindset, most especially the mindset, not just of the students, of the teachers, and of the parents. Because everyone else actually believes that English, the only way to acquire English is to impose on them, okay, that they should use the language, the teachers should use the language in classroom discussions, the students should be harassed, okay, obligated to use the language as well. Imagine the amount of brilliant ideas that were just put into waste because these kids are not allowed to express themselves in their mother tongue. Or imagine the questions that probably have arisen during discussion, okay, only because they are not allowed to ask questions in their mother tongue. Okay, how would we know that there's even learning going on in the classrooms? We ask them questions in English, or they'd like to say something that, I have problems with this, but they could hardly express themselves in English. So, okay, they didn't ask questions anymore. There was no interaction because of the fear that if they speak in their mother tongue, it's either the teacher won't accept that, won't allow that, or they would just be, how come you have not acquired the language yet, and so forth and so on. So slowly, there was a complete paradigm shift from the EOP, the English education. So under grade 3, until 10, okay, we use English with the mother tongue of the locality. In other words, we encourage the use of multilingual education in classroom discussion. And from then on, there were a lot of studies that proved that there were better interaction in class, okay, better learning, better discussion, okay, and clearer understanding of everything going on in the classroom. There was no fear at all anymore to speak in their mother tongue. And now in the Philippines, we are slowly expanding the FTB MLE. We currently have 19 languages now, and we are working on adding more Philippine languages as a medium of instruction in teaching, not just in the first 3 levels, but probably even after that. Even in high school and college, we encourage the use of mother tongue in classroom discussion. Okay, not just English, not just English. So that's what I want everyone to realize. Okay, let's put value into our mother tongue. We have to empower the language. If we language teachers discourage our students to use their own mother tongue, okay, then we are just contributing to the problem. And we have to empower the language. We have to make them realize that their language is vital in the learning process. Okay. So we have a responsibility to take actually as language teachers. We have to do our own part as well. Okay, let them feel that whatever language they speak, that is all right, and we encourage them to make use of their mother tongue, because that's actually vital in the learning process. I hope each one of you consider, try to observe. It may not be a scientific study, it may not be a research, but just try, just experiment in your own way. Okay, if you encourage the use of the mother tongue in the discussion, you may ask questions using whatever is the language that you are most comfortable with, and see how that will change the scenario in classroom discussions. And I'm very positive that it will actually encourage more participation, okay, and that the students will feel the sense of belongingness, okay, and their language is actually empowered. Okay, so I hope that by next year, if the Gilgit thing, the MTB-MLE conference is happening, I hope to hear more sharing, more studies, more participation, looking at how the use of mother tongue based in your own classrooms have actually changed, have impacted on the learning process and so forth and so on.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. It's my first participation in ICLAP. I'm really thankful to Wala Mirza, Dr. Aftab, and Ms. Sajida. And I participated in this conference along with some wonderful practitioners like Zaman Sagar is here, Aftab Ahmad is here, Naseem and Zubair, Saeed and all these wonderful guys. They have been working on these endangered languages for over a decade or so, 15 years. Some are based in southern Pakistan and a few are based in northern Pakistan in the form of FLI and IAL. When we see at the indigenous communities all over the world and especially in Pakistan, we find that we are victims of this development discourse, which is of course a model we borrowed from Europe or North America. And with this, the development discourse, with this the term comes national, nation and all these things. So the title of this conversation was National Development and Linguistic Diversity. So I'm very uncomfortable with terms like national, nationality, nationalism, all these things. Because when you talk about national development, it means development for a few people, for a particular class, not all the people. That's why I said that we are victim of this national building project since the inception of Pakistan here in 1947. In Pakistan, you see that over 73 languages are spoken, but unfortunately because of this developmental discourse, many of the indigenous languages, their languages are called dialects or non-dialects. Only few people, the general public in Pakistan, they know about Pashto, Punjabi, Sindhi. They regard these languages and all the rest of the languages, they call them dialects, only dialects. And their culture is folk culture. They have no crafts, but they have handicrafts. They have no art, but they have handicraft. And all this stigmatization because of this developmental discourse within Pakistan and of course in the world as well, it has historically brutalized these indigenous people within these communities, economically disadvantaged and marginalized, politically marginalized. So over the years, these people, they have lost their identity, their sense of self-esteem, and they regard their language and culture as obstacles in the way of development. And we are victims of, as Shirley mentioned, tyranny of language. English is imposed on us, and along with English, the national language is also being imposed upon us. So, and Pakistan is one of those countries which is very, very negative, adamant to the linguistic diversity. Sorry to say that, but it's a fact. We hear many times, and after the 2010, when the education subject was devolved to the provinces, there were some policies, and Singh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they try to adopt these languages as medium of instruction or to be taught at these schools. But what happened? One political government adopted this policy. When it was not in the power, another comes in. So that government just leave it off and start imposing another policy of this English medium and the Urdu medium. But there are some, when we started work on the documentation and preservation of these endangered indigenous languages in the north, Chitral, Swat, Gilgit-Baltistan and all these areas, through our organizations, smaller organizations like Maya, IPT, FLI and other organizations working over there. So we didn't know and we were not hopeful that a time will come and conferences like this one will be held and things like what we were doing will be discussed and our voices will be heard by people like in the academia and even in some particular and some among some policy makers as well. So we have started this work by our own. We didn't have any academic background, any academic support, although we got some initial training from some linguists who came here to this region for their research, for their thesis or things like that. And believe me, over the years, we all these activists, we became able to develop orthographies for 20 languages also since 2000 onwards. These languages had no writing system, no writing traditions as well. So we developed the writing system for that, and we have been publishing books in these languages, on these languages, in these languages, and we have been publishing papers as well. And as Shirley mentioned, MTB-MLE, we have also been implementing some initial early childhood education and of MTB-MLE by our own, with no support from the government. This is a misfortune for us. But over the years, what we have been now witnessing that people are becoming more aware, and hopefully in the future, as my colleague Ahmar mentioned, we will be having more conferences, more awareness campaign, and all with the policy makers. We will be engaged with them, and hopefully things will be changed over the years. We think so, and we will, of course, we need some good practices. As Shirley mentioned, in Philippines, the government adopted those MTB-MLE system. In other East Asian states, we see some bigger organizations are doing that work. UNESCO has been doing that work. Save the Children has been doing that work. So we will learn from and hopefully some experiences in the next coming conferences from Philippines and from rest of the world will make our policymakers aware of these things. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, it's been a wonderful conference, and I've heard some remarkable things from some remarkable people, and my journey also began in my field trip, my experience of being hosted in Sabat. I said to my colleague Ahmar this morning that since I was 18, about indigenous people, so that we are, and in some senses, under 5,000 years plus of continuous occupation of our continent, even before it was the continent that it is now. And in less than 250 years, we have experienced arrested development, courtesy of the British. I've said this in most of my talks in this 3 days. So, a very primitive society led by the King of England and his fleet of so-called colonisers, they were invaders, let's be honest, came to Australia and in a very short space of time destroyed 65,000 years of human knowledge, of wisdom, of great philosophy, at least 400 languages, and for what? What did it achieve? Well, don't let this happen to Pakistan. You have an incredible diversity in this country of human culture. You have wonderful religious system, and it's enhanced by all the different cultures that are in this country. You have a future that I have to say my people don't have, but we could look to you for how to survive and how to continue. So one of the reasons I'm here is to reach out from my very small, very much, look, we're hardy survivors, we're still here. I'm Aboriginal. There are a lot of people in Australia who would probably laugh and say, when I was growing up, I wasn't just laughed at, we were actually described as rubbish people. So, and the reason we were rubbish people was because the people in southeastern Australia were not meant to exist. And the fact that we kept existing was a big inconvenience. So in the 20th century, the Australian government went through a major development exercise to turn us into whitefellas, as we call non-Aboriginal people, and it was called the assimilation period. During that period, our children were stolen. I mean, they actually were stolen. So government officials would come into our communities and take the children. And there are many, many, many stories of mothers and fathers running behind vehicles, crying and trying to recapture their children. My own mother hid me in a cupboard because I was light-skinned. And and it's very, very common. And we were in a city. We weren't even people who were particularly causing any trouble for anyone. We weren't trying to force anybody off our country. Everybody had gone into my country already anyway. That's why I exist as I do. My ancestors were Scots, Irish settlers who came into my country and turned it into cattle country. And my great-great-grandmother, when she met my ancestor and he said, all of this country is mine, she said, typically Aboriginal woman, she said, well, that makes you mine because this is my country. So she established a new family and I'm the result of that. So I'm grateful for her. But the problem is that our families had to hide who we were and essentially give up our languages. So it wasn't a deliberate decision. It was a decision made for us. And our families attempted to, become part of the assimilation so that we didn't stand out. We've had a terrible history, and it's only very recently in my lifetime that it's turned around. In 1967, we were counted in the census of Australia as human beings for the first time. So that's in my lifetime. When I was born, wouldn't have been counted in the census. Just in the last 2 days, something absolutely remarkable has happened that I have to share with all of you, and I think it's probably prophetic that it's happened while I'm here at this conference. For the first time in Australia, a government has provided legislation to protect the languages, the Aboriginal languages of its jurisdiction. So that is the state of New South Wales, where my university sits and where I work and live. I also live near my mountains in Canberra, which is another territory. So for the very first time, we will have a law that says that our languages are protected. It's going to also set up a regime for funding and a language centre. I used to run a language centre across the whole of New South Wales, so they're going to reinstate that, which is quite amazing. We also have a thing called the Native Title Act, which I was part of the team that drafted back in 1993. It was one of my first real jobs. Sorry, those of you who are academics, we don't do real jobs. Most people will tell you that. So when I wasn't in the university, I was in the public service, and my public service job was to help draft this act. And that came about because in 1992, a man called Eddie Mabo won his case. He had died by the time he won it, tragically. That he was a Torres Strait Islander man who took the government of Queensland to court to say that it was illegal for them to just simply take his country. And he won. So it's called Mabo number 2, because he lost the first time round, poor man. As a result, Australia discovered a very uncomfortable legal fact, the Australian government, which is that Australia was not an empty country. The term terra nullius was used. So when the British invaded in 1788, they said that our country was empty, terra nullius. There were no people, because we were nomadic people. We certainly had our territories, but from the point of view of the British, we didn't have gardens, we didn't do the things that they did, we didn't have fancy buildings, but we had 65,000 years of fancy human society, of the most complex philosophies. Our languages are amongst the most complex in the world. They're polysynthetic languages, and I love watching white fellas trying to learn them. It's hilarious. But anyway, you probably all learn it very easily because you're very clever Indigenous people, I think. You know, it's been a long journey. Now, one of the things that I have found is that when people start to begin to re-engage with their languages, or keep their languages going, their health improves. One of the things that we have in Australia as Aboriginal people, it doesn't matter whether you're a flash middle-class black fella, as we say, like me. I'm a relatively rich black fella. But the chances of me committing suicide are really high, because most Aboriginal people do at some point attempt to kill themselves. And we have a very, very big rate of youth suicide. In fact, in parts of Australia, it's almost certain that young people will die before they reach 20. So, and it's, my daughter had a friend aged 11 who killed herself in Canberra, in one of our richest cities, you know. So, and this is because of loss of identity, and one of the big things that you lose when you lose your language is a sense of who you are. You can't talk about who you are in your own way. The other thing that happens is the country loses. So all of Australia has lost. I don't feel sorry for white fellas, but they don't know how to look after the country. Australia is the driest place on earth, and most of the people in the country don't know how to manage it. We did, and we do. So people are beginning to listen to us, but it's almost too late. We've gone right to the edge, but we haven't given up. So there is a small study that was done in Central Australia in the last several years of 2 communities side by side. In one community, the language is almost finished, and the rate of chronic disease, particularly heart disease and diabetes, which are our biggest killers, or next to suicide, diabetes and heart disease are our biggest killers. And the community that's lost its language are extremely sick. And the community next door, where their language is maintained, are actually comparatively very healthy. And this is not only a case in Australia, but Canadian studies have demonstrated the same thing. So there are indicators of how a community can remain healthy. And also it's, look, on a pure economic basis for a government, why would you want to have a lot of people who need to be hospitalised on renal dialysis machines? We recently lost one of our greatest singers, Dr. G. We're not allowed to speak the name of people who died, so we can call him Dr. G. And he died of a completely curable disease. He had renal failure, he had diabetes. If he was a white fella in a big city in Australia, it wouldn't have happened. So there was a great soul man. So all I can say is keep your languages going if you want to stay alive, and if you want your country to thrive, keep your languages going. And I think that's something that's come through this conference. There's definitely a thread of Indigenous strength. I applaud it, and I'd like to learn more about it myself. Thank you. Shukriya.